So one of the most common philosophies of mind is functionalism. So functionalism focuses on the idea of mental states, and often they'll talk about being in pain as a sort of example mental state. So the state of being in pain is decided or defined on this view, not what pain feels like, or even just the physical occurrences that cause or associated with it, such as we're not going to talk about neurons in our brain being in certain physical states, but instead we're going to talk about the role that pain has in the entire cognitive system. So one way you can think about it is if you have one of those business charts where you have the president and the vice president and all these people, they're defined by the managers especially are defined by their role in the whole system. So you can't say what a manager is without saying what role they have in the system, because that's just what a manager is. So for functionalism, we define mental states in terms of their functional role in the system. So the other mental states they tend to produce, behaviors that result from the mental states that cause the mental state. Again, we're not going to talk about what neurons fire when you're in pain, but rather that usually is caused by stubbing your toe or bodily injury. And then being in pain causes you to believe that you've been injured. It produces the mental state of distress. Remember we talked about sort of reacting to our mental states, and it causes other behaviors such as saying ouch or searching for pain medication. So again, since functionalism doesn't say anything about what physically happens in the brain to cause us to have pain, it also doesn't make any claims about what a person might feel. So it leaves out these ideas in part, or it leaves out this kind of definition to allow for something called multiple realizability. This is just the idea that you can have pain that occurs in different kinds of systems. So one of the main example people give or analogy is with computers. The idea is that the mental states are like a computer program that you can run it on a Windows laptop, you can run it on a desktop, a computer, a phone, or whatever. You can also think of it like stories or words or a book, which could be audio format, could be paper format, could be braille, but it's all the same book. Why do we want this for mental states? Well, part of the reason is to allow the possibility of creatures or even machines that are different from humans but could also have mental states such as pain. So in principle then, anything from humans to bats, cockroaches, computers, they could feel pain if they had states that have the correct causal relations to other states. So if you're going to say that pain is the sort of thing that is caused by injury and causes you to say ouch, then you could have a cell carbon-based brain that realized these states, or you could have a silicon-based brain that realized these states. It really doesn't matter. But weirdly enough, one of the worries with functionalism is that it doesn't include enough. So if you are a creature that lacks a certain mental state, you would have to lack other mental states if those states were defined by their link to the mental states that creatures don't have. So let's say that sadness, just as an example, let's say that sadness was defined by partly by its functional relationship to being in pain. If somebody then couldn't feel pain or couldn't have pain for whatever reason, then they wouldn't be able to have sadness either. So this kind of holistic picture of the nature of mental states could perhaps result in less inclusiveness, being that you can have creatures with different kinds of brains that can have pain, but if they lack certain states, they might not be able to have other states. David Lewis also raises the possibility of creatures with pain that is caused by different stimuli than ours, results in different motor outputs, and has a different functional role. So I put in this whole long quote because I wanted to be clear what's going on here. He imagines a madman who has something that feels like pain, let's say, but it results from something completely different. It doesn't result from being hurt. It results from moderate exercise and an empty stomach, instead of making him want to get pain medication. It makes him want to think about mathematics. And he doesn't groan when he's in pain, but he crosses his legs and snaps his fingers. So the point is that, could we have something that counted as pain and yet cause completely different behaviors? You could also, just as part of this wouldn't quite work, but you could imagine people who are incredibly stoic and never said ouch when they were in pain or something like that. That would be just a piece of it that was missing, and you need more than that. But the idea is that you could have a lot of these pieces that could be missing, a lot of these behaviors that it might not be caused by the same thing, it might not cause you to do the same thing, but could it still be pain? And if we agree that you could have something that, let's say, felt like pain that still didn't cause the same reactions and wasn't caused by the same things, then that's a problem for functionalism, because the madman's pain doesn't follow a functionally defined pattern that we recognize. So it seems to be pain without functioning like pain in the system of our body. So is that possible for the functionalist? It's not. It has to function like pain in order to be pain. It doesn't really matter what it feels like or whether it's pain in the way that we think of it. So is pain a feeling? I mean, that's kind of what we think, right? If we're to define pain, we're not going to talk about, normal people probably aren't going to talk about what it makes us do, or they might talk about what causes it, but mostly they're going to talk about what it feels like. So as functionalism seems to miss something about mental states, it's what they feel like. If you ask somebody what pain is, they're going to describe what pain is, probably, and not necessarily talk about the causes of it. So this is called the problem of qualia, and we can define that as the subjective conscious feeling or experience of mental states. So that's what qualia is. It's the experience that mental states give us. And functionalism seems to allow for the possibility of mental states with no what it feels like. Because again, it's just defined as functions, so the feeling is sort of left out of it. And so in principle, you could have something that functioned like pain but didn't feel like anything. And one way to illustrate this is this idea of inverted qualia. So the inverted qualia objection says, okay, what if you had a creature who experienced mental states in a different way than everybody else, but the functional role of this mental state was exactly the same? So what about people who see red as green? What if they behaved in exactly the same way as somebody who saw green as green? And you can link their mental states together in exactly the same way. So they would stop at a stoplight when it was red, and it would cause them to, the behaviors would be the same, the inputs would be the same, but they're not seeing it the same way. The functionalist seems to be committed to saying there's no difference. If the behavior is the same, if the causal role and functional role of the mental state is the same, there is no difference for functionalism, it seems. And yet we do seem to think that there's something disanalogous about people who see red as green and green as green. We want to say that they're experiencing red differently. Well, with functionalism, there's no room for the idea of the subjective experience. It's not included. The absent qualia objection is similar. It says that, look, you can imagine something that functions just like a human being but has no subjective experience at all. And here's an example. This is Ned Block's example, the Chinese nation thought experiment. So he says, let's imagine the entire population of China duplicating the functional organization of a brain for a period of time. So they would receive sensory inputs, they would give outputs, They would do all the functional roles of mental states. But it seems like even if you could do this, the nation of China wouldn't feel anything as a whole. The system wouldn't feel anything, or wouldn't experience anything, right? So this inverted quality idea, or this absent quality idea, is supposed to show that there's something missing from the functionalist picture, that we want to say that there is something it is like to experience redness, let's say, or greenness, and to just completely leave that out of the picture and say it's all about the functional roles of the mental states seems kind of wrong. Now, some functionalists are just going to say, no, subjective experience doesn't exist. There's no difference between the red-green person and the green-green person. There's because the functional role is exactly the same, there's just no difference. And physicalists, a lot of physicalists about the mind, or materialists, who think that mental states are just neurons firing, let's just be simple about it, some of them take up this same view and say, look, there just aren't any qualia. There's no such thing as subjective experience, which is kind of strange. But for them, it's just not. It's just there's just nothing to that idea that there's a subjective experience. So we'll see what the next theory is next time.